In a poor neighborhood, a black teenager living with his mother in hardship crosses paths with a confused, homeless old man rummaging through a trash can after his late-night shift. Despite facing prejudice and having little himself, the boy decides to bring the man home. What started as a simple act of kindness leads to the unthinkable. The old man turns out to be the long-lost father of a billionaire, and the emotional reunion changes the boy and his mother's lives forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you watching from. We love to hear your thought. It was just past midnight in Little Pine, a neighborhood that never really slept but never fully woke up either. The streets smelled like old oil and damp pavement, the kind of place where corner stores stayed open too late and no one made eye contact unless they had to. Marcus Reed, 17 years old, stepped out the back door of Gracie's Grill carrying a black trash bag that leaked slightly at the bottom. The alley behind the diner was narrow, lined with rusted dumpsters, graffiti, and the faint sound of jazz from a second-floor apartment window above. The chill in the air settled deep into his hoodie as he exhaled, his breath fogging under the flickering alley light. Marcus was tall for his age, slim, but with that wiry strength that came from walking everywhere and carrying too much. His skin was dark like polished walnut, his jaw sharp, his eyes tired. He wore black sneakers, cheap and worn, and a hoodie that had faded from years of washing. His face still held the roundness of a teenager, but his expression was that of someone used to being judged the second he walked into a room. That night, like every other, he'd been stared at by customers who gave him the kind of look that said, "Watch my purse," without saying a word. One woman had whispered to her husband just loud enough for Marcus to hear, "Is he even old enough to work here?" While another man handed him his tip by placing it on the table rather than in his hand. He had learned to keep his head down and move fast, like he didn't notice, like it didn't sting. It did, but he buried it somewhere deeper than where tiredness lived. He reached the dumpster and tossed the bag in with a grunt. As it landed, he heard a soft rustle, not from the trash, but from the shadows at the far end of the alley. Marcus straightened, instinctively wary. Then he saw it. A figure hunched low beside the wall, wrapped in layers of filthy blankets. For a second he thought it was a pile of rags, but it moved. Slow, twitchy. A man, old, thin, digging through a torn grocery bag like he was looking for treasure. Marcus could make out a crust of bread in the man's hand, and the way he looked at it, not with disgust but hesitation, like he was trying to decide if it was edible. The man's face was gaunt, his gray beard thick and knotted, his eyes pale and lost. One of his shoes had no sole and the other was stuffed with newspaper. Marcus stood frozen, his hand still on the dumpster lid, debating whether to pretend he hadn't seen anything. His mother always said they couldn't afford to help anyone, not when they were behind on their own bills. "You can't fix everything, baby," she used to say, especially not on an empty fridge. But the man's fingers were shaking, not from age alone. This was something else. Hunger, cold, maybe both. Marcus shifted, unsure. Then, almost against his own better judgment, he called out, "Hey!" "Sir?" His voice cracked a little on the second word. The man didn't respond right away, just kept staring at the bread. Marcus stepped forward cautiously. "Are you okay?" The man looked up, slow and unfocused, like it took effort just to lift his head. His eyes met Marcus's for a second, then drifted past him like he wasn't fully there. Marcus hesitated. Something in the man's expression, something fragile, made him pause. "Hold on," he muttered and turned back into the diner. He grabbed a styrofoam box from the stack, filled it with leftover fries and half a burger no one had touched. It wasn't much, but it was warm. He added a sealed water bottle and returned to the alley, stepping quietly. He crouched down near the man and held the food out. "Here," he said. "It's not trash. You should eat." The man blinked slowly, his eyes focusing on the box like it might disappear if he reached for it. Finally he took it, his fingers brushing Marcus's. They were ice-cold, dry like old paper. "Thank you," he said, his voice raspy and faint. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, unsure why he wanted to know. The man opened his mouth, then closed it, his forehead wrinkled. I think it's Walter," he said finally. "Sometimes I remember, other times it's all gone. I had an accident, I think, my head. Since then, I just wander." Marcus looked away, guilt pooling in his stomach. This wasn't supposed to happen tonight. He had school in the morning, a mom working 2 jobs, and barely enough dinner at home for both of them. He should walk away. But when he saw Walter struggle to pull a torn blanket around his shoulders again, saw the way his hands trembled trying to hold the water bottle steady, something inside Marcus hardened. He exhaled, voice low. "Come on. You can crash on our couch tonight. My mom. She might be mad, but she's not cruel." Walter stared at him like he didn't understand the words. Then, slowly, he stood up on wobbly legs and followed as Marcus turned and started walking into the dark. The apartment smelled like boiled cabbage and Lysol, the kind of scent that clung to the walls of low-income housing no matter how many times you cleaned. The paint on the doorframe had chipped, and one of the hallway lights outside blinked in and out like it was trying to decide whether to keep living. Marcus paused with his hand on the doorknob, his chest tight. Walter stood behind him, hunched and silent, his coat wrapped around him like armor. For a second, Marcus wondered if he was about to make a huge mistake. He turned the knob slowly and pushed the door open. Inside, the light over the kitchen sink cast a warm but weary glow across the small space. The living room was no bigger than a motel room, with a brown plaid couch that had seen better decades, and a folding table pushed against the wall where a pile of unopened bills sat like a quiet warning. In the kitchenette, his mother stood over a dented pot on the stove, stirring slowly with one hand while the other rubbed her lower back. Diane Reed was in her mid-40s but looked older after years of working hospital janitor shifts that started before sunrise. Her uniform was still on, faded green scrubs and tennis shoes she never took off until bedtime. She turned at the sound of the door, eyes narrowing when she saw her son step in with a stranger behind him. Her gaze flicked from Marcus to Walter and back again. Her voice was quiet but sharp, like the edge of a knife that had been used too many times. "Marcus, who is that?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He shifted, closed the door behind them. Walter stood near the entrance, silent, eyes on the floor like he wasn't sure he was allowed to look up. Marcus cleared his throat. "This is Walter. I found him behind the diner. He was digging through trash, looked like he hadn't eaten in days." Diane wiped her hands on a dish towel, her expression unreadable. Her voice didn't rise, but there was tension in her shoulders, in the way her fingers tightened around the towel. "And you thought the best place to bring a grown man you don't know is here?" "I didn't know where else to take him," Marcus said quietly. "He's not dangerous, just lost. He doesn't even remember who he is half the time." She looked at Walter then, really looked at him. The layers of dirt on his skin, the hole in his coat, the dull glaze in his eyes. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there like a shadow, trying not to offend the light. Diane exhaled through her nose. Her eyes softened, but her tone stayed flat. "You hungry?" she asked without looking at him. Walter nodded once, barely. She turned back to the stove and ladled soup into a chipped white bowl, then walked it over to the small table. "And sit," she said, pointing. Walter hesitated. He stepped forward, slow, like every movement cost him something. He lowered himself into the chair and wrapped both hands around the bowl like it was the only warm thing in the world. The steam rose and fogged his glasses, and for a moment he didn't move. Then he took a cautious sip. A soft sound escaped his lips, a sigh that felt more like a release than relief. Marcus stood off to the side, watching his mother. She hadn't yelled, hadn't told him to get Walter out. That alone was a small miracle. Diane pulled out a chair across from Walter and sat down slowly, folding her arms. Her voice dropped a little. "You got any family, Mr. Walter?" He blinked at the soup, then up at her, confused. "I don't know, maybe. Some days I think I had a son, but I can't picture his face. Other days I wake up and I don't even know what city I'm in." Diane's eyes didn't flinch. She nodded slowly, like she'd seen worse stories come through the ER hallway on her cleaning rounds. "Well, you can sleep on the couch tonight. We don't have much, but it's warm, that's all I can promise." Walter looked at her, the spoon shaking in his hand, then down at the soup like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to finish it. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough and low. This is real kind." Diane stood without a word and walked into the bedroom. Marcus followed with his eyes until the door closed, then glanced back at Walter, who had slowed his eating but hadn't stopped. He pulled out an old blanket from the closet and laid it on the couch, folding it twice. Walter looked up when he finished, eyes glassy. "You didn't have to bring me here," he said. Marcus shrugged. "Yeah, well, didn't feel right leaving you out there either." The older man gave a slow nod. "You remind me of someone. A long time ago, I think." He took another sip of soup. "Maybe I'm wrong." Marcus didn't reply. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall, knees pulled up, staring at the silent TV. The air felt heavier now, like the room had inhaled something sacred and was holding its breath. Walter finished eating and curled onto the couch without asking for more. He didn't say goodnight, just pulled the blanket over himself and closed his eyes. From the bedroom, Marcus heard his mother moving around quietly, probably folding laundry or sorting bills that didn't have enough money behind them. He felt the weight of what he'd done, bringing home a man they didn't know, using what little they had to feed him. But he also felt something else, a strange, quiet peace. He looked over at Walter, who was already breathing deep, lost in whatever dreams came to people who no longer remembered themselves. Marcus leaned his head back against the wall and let his own eyes close. The room was small, the future uncertain, but for the first time in weeks the silence wasn't heavy with worry. It was just silence and soup and a couch shared by 3 people who, for now, didn't ask for anything more. The morning air tasted like cold metal, sharp and thin, sliding into Marcus's lungs as he stepped out of the apartment. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the buildings along the street still slept behind drawn blinds and chipped shutters. The sky was a flat gray, stretched low over the rooftops like a blanket not quite big enough. He zipped his hoodie up to his chin, backpack slung over one shoulder, the other carrying the weight of knowing he'd brought a stranger into their home. Behind him, the door creaked open again. Walter emerged slowly, arms folded tight across his chest, wearing the same coat from the night before. It still looked like it could fall apart with one strong gust. He blinked against the light, blinking slower than most, like everything took him an extra moment to process. Marcus turned slightly, unsure if Walter meant to follow him or just needed some air. Walter didn't say anything. He just stood there until Marcus gave a short nod toward the street. Without a word, Walter stepped beside him. They walked in silence past shuttered storefronts and broken bus stop benches. Marcus kept glancing sideways, watching the old man's uneven gait, The way he limped slightly on the right, the way his fingers twitched every time a car passed too close. Still, he was more alert than the night before. Less ghost, more human. Marcus didn't know how long Walter planned to stay. Maybe he didn't know either, but something about his presence, quiet, deliberate, felt less like a burden and more like a question waiting for an answer. When they reached Gracie's grill, Marcus hesitated just before the door. He hadn't thought this through. Bringing Walter home was one thing, bringing him into the diner was something else. The place was already half full, early risers hunched over black coffee and dry toast. Marcus could see their faces through the window, some regulars, some strangers. He felt his stomach clench as he pictured the look on Gracie's face when she saw him walk in with a man who looked like he had crawled out of a storm drain. He turned to Walter, scratching the back of his neck. "You can wait outside if you want. I'll bring something out when I get a break." Walter didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the inside of the diner, the warmth, the motion, the life. Then he spoke, voice low but clear. "I can help?" Marcus blinked. "What?" Walter's spine straightened just enough to look less fragile. "I don't want to sit out here. I used to work. I think I did. I don't remember what exactly, but my hands—" He looked down at them, gnarled and trembling. "They remember something." Marcus didn't know what to say. He wanted to believe him. Something in the way Walter said it, without pride or pity, just a plain statement of truth, made it hard to brush off, but still, Marcus hesitated. Walter barely had the strength to climb stairs, let alone carry trays or mop floors. Gracie ran a tight ship, and she didn't do favors. Before he could respond, the door swung open. Gracie stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Her short gray hair was pulled back, her apron already stained with coffee. She looked at Marcus, then at Walter, then back at Marcus. "You bringing guests to work now?" Her voice was blunt, clipped, tired like always. Marcus opened his mouth, already feeling the blood rush to his ears. "He's just—" Gracie raised one hand, cutting him off. She looked at Walter again, slower this time. Walter didn't flinch. He stood steady, even as his hands betrayed him with tiny tremors. Gracie let out a long breath. "He can wipe tables. That's it. If he slows anything down, he's out, understand?" Marcus stared at her, unsure he'd heard right. Walter looked down, his shoulders dropping, and nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Gracie turned and walked back in without another word. Inside the diner, the air was thick with the smell of bacon grease and burnt toast. The coffee machines hissed and clinked, waitresses moved like clockwork, and somewhere in the corner, the old jukebox played a dusty blues track that nobody paid attention to. Marcus tossed on his apron and handed Walter a rag. "Start with the booze near the back," he said quietly. Walter took the rag with both hands, gripping it like it had weight. Then he got to work. At first, no one noticed him, just another man cleaning tables. But as the morning wore on, customers began to glance, then whisper. A couple of them stared a little too long. One man narrowed his eyes when Walter passed by and muttered something under his breath. Something Marcus couldn't quite hear but recognized in tone. That slow, lazy disgust some people carried like tradition. Marcus tightened his jaw but said nothing. Walter moved slow, but he never stopped. Every time Marcus glanced his way, he was still working, bent over, careful, methodical. He didn't ask for water or food. He didn't even sit. Around noon, a man in a faded plaid jacket looked up from his corner booth and squinted. "Hey," he called, eyes tracking Walter's steps. "You look familiar." Walter paused, blinked at the man, confusion flashing across his face. "Do I?" he asked softly. The man tilted his head. "Yeah, I think so. You used to—" He trailed off, frowning. "Never mind. Probably just someone else." Walter nodded, but Marcus saw a flicker behind his eyes, like a locked door rattling from the other side. The day passed slower after that. Marcus took orders, refilled mugs, but his eyes kept drifting back to Walter. There was something about him now, more rooted, less adrift. He wasn't just surviving, he was trying, not for approval, not for sympathy, just to be useful, just to belong. Gracie didn't say much, but at one point she muttered, "He's quiet. That's more than I can say for half the kids I hire." Marcus didn't smile, but inside he felt a small weight lift. When his shift ended, Marcus stepped into the alley to dump the trash. The sky had begun to darken again, clouds gathering, like yesterday was coming back for a second round. As he pulled the bin toward the dumpster, something fluttered against his leg. A flyer. He bent down, picked it up. The paper was damp, edges curled, but the photo was clear. A black and white image. A man, mid-60s, gray beard, eyes familiar. The name printed underneath read, Walter H. Ellis, missing, last seen 3 months ago. Marcus stared, his breath catching in his throat. The photo matched almost perfectly. Only the eyes were different, awake now, less empty. He looked toward the diner door, heart thudding. Walter wasn't just a man with no past. He was someone who'd been lost, and maybe, just maybe, someone who was about to be found. Marcus didn't wait. He pushed through the back door of the diner with the flyer still clenched in his hand, heart racing like it knew something his mind hadn't caught up to yet. The afternoon rush had settled, but the clatter of plates and hum of conversation still filled the air. Walter was near the front, wiping down a booth with the same slow care he'd shown all morning. Marcus walked straight to him, not even noticing Gracie behind the counter or the glances of curious customers. He stopped a few feet away, his voice low and urgent. "Walter." The old man looked up, blinking at Marcus, then at the paper in his hand. Marcus swallowed. "I found this outside. It's you." He handed it over slowly, almost afraid to let go. Walter took it, and as soon as his eyes landed on the image, something in his body shifted. He gripped the edges of the flyer so tightly the paper creased beneath his fingers. His breath caught in his throat, lips parting like he was trying to speak but couldn't. Marcus watched as the scarred hand rose slowly to Walter's temple, pressing against the skin like he was trying to force something loose. "I know this house," Walter whispered, voice shaking. I don't know how, but I know it. This is mine." He stepped back from the table, unsteady but determined, eyes locked on the address printed at the bottom of the flyer. Marcus didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Walter looked at him with a clarity Marcus hadn't seen before. "We have to go, now." Marcus glanced at Gracie. She stood behind the counter, watching, arms folded but face unreadable. After a pause, she gave a small nod. "Go on, kid. He's not going to get there without you." Outside, the sky had deepened into a late afternoon haze. Walter walked faster than Marcus expected, though his legs trembled with each step. He held the flyer like it was the only thing anchoring him to this world. Marcus caught up beside him and looked around, unsure. The address was across town, too far to walk before dark. He pulled Walter gently toward the bus stop at the end of the block. Walter flinched at first, startled by the contact, but when he saw Marcus reaching into his pocket for crumpled bills, he relaxed. The bus ride was quiet, tense. Walter sat with the flyer pressed to his lap, eyes flicking between it and the window like he was afraid the street outside would disappear if he blinked. Marcus sat beside him, arms folded, heart pounding. He didn't know what they'd find. He didn't know who might open the door or whether they'd believe them, but he knew he had to do this. Something about the way Walter had said "this is mine" made it impossible to turn back. When the bus finally slowed and hissed to a stop, Walter stood before the doors had fully opened. He stepped onto the pavement with urgency, nearly tripping as he turned toward the neighborhood ahead. Marcus followed, catching his breath as they walked. Houses here were nothing like where Marcus lived. Front lawns trimmed like magazine pages, porches with rocking chairs that looked like they'd never seen rain. Every mailbox matched, every window had clean blinds. Marcus felt out of place instantly, like his shoes were too loud for the silence. Then Walter stopped. He was standing in front of a 2-story white house with black shutters and a porch light already glowing in the gathering dusk. His breath caught. "That's it," he whispered. "That's my home." He moved up the walkway, shoulders tense, legs barely steady. At the foot of the steps he hesitated. His hand hovered near the doorbell, fingers twitching. Marcus stood a few feet behind, watching. Walter pressed the button. A chime echoed faintly inside. Then silence. Footsteps approached. The door opened. A man stood there, early 30s, dark hair, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired in a way that didn't come from lack of sleep. When he saw Walter, he froze. His mouth opened, then closed again. "Dad?" The word was quiet. Like he didn't believe it, like saying it out loud might break whatever spell had brought this ghost to his front door. Walter staggered back, as if the word itself knocked the air from his lungs. He tried to speak but couldn't. His knees buckled. The younger man lunged forward and caught him, arms wrapping around him before he could fall. "I thought," he started, but the rest was lost. Walter collapsed into him, shaking, sobbing with no restraint. His fingers clung to the man's shirt, his entire body trembling. The sobs weren't clean, they weren't gentle. They were raw, like something had been torn open that had never fully healed. Marcus looked away, not out of discomfort but respect. This wasn't his moment. It didn't belong to him. But it still broke something open in his chest. The man helped Walter stand, arms steady around him. Walter looked up, tears streaking his face, voice uneven. "I didn't remember. I forgot your face. I thought I was already dead." "You came home," the man said, his voice cracking. "You found your way." Walter nodded slowly. "I didn't do it alone." The man turned his gaze to Marcus then, eyes locking for the first time. There was something unreadable there, gratitude, shock, maybe disbelief, but he didn't say anything yet. He just gave Marcus a quiet, respectful nod. Then he helped Walter inside, one step at a time. Marcus stood on the porch, unsure if he should follow or leave. He looked at the warm hallway beyond the door, at the photos on the wall, the untouched dinner table. This wasn't his world. It wasn't his ending. He turned and walked back toward the street, hands in his pockets, head down. The porch light stayed on behind him, but he didn't look back. Walter had found his way home. That was enough. The scent of onions sizzling in oil drifted through the apartment, mixing with the steam rising from the chipped pot on the stove. Diane stirred slowly, back turned, her eyes on the curling edges of a past due notice propped between the salt and pepper shakers. She'd come home bone-tired as usual, kicked off her shoes at the door, tied her headscarf tighter, and started dinner without asking where Marcus had gone. That was their rhythm. Sometimes silence was easier than questions you weren't ready to answer. She'd barely noticed the time until the knock came at the door. It wasn't loud, but it didn't sound like a neighbor. Diane wiped her hands on a dish rag, glanced toward the window. Marcus hadn't texted, and that alone sent something cold through her ribs. She opened the door with one hand still gripping the towel, her expression already drawn tight. The man standing on the other side wore a tailored suit, pressed clean, shoes polished. shoulders square like someone who walked into meetings and got listened to, but Diane's eyes went past him, locking onto the face behind him. Walter. He looked different, clean-shaven, hair combed back, a coat that actually fit his frame. But the eyes were the same, softer, clearer now, but carrying something familiar. She didn't speak. She just blinked, uncertain if what she saw was real. Walter gave a small nod, and his voice was steadier than she'd ever heard it. "You must be Diane." It wasn't a question. She stepped back slightly, letting the door swing open. "I am?" she said cautiously. Marcus stepped out from the kitchen behind her, wiping his hands on his jeans, heart leaping into his throat when he saw them. "Walter?" His voice was quiet, like he didn't trust it yet. Walter smiled, and something behind that expression made Marcus feel like everything had been worth it. "I wanted to come back. We wanted to thank you properly." The man beside him stepped forward now, extending a hand to Diane first. "I'm David Ellis," he said. "Walter is my father. I spent 3 months searching for him. I owe both of you more than I can say." Diane shook his hand slowly, studying his face like she was still catching up. "We just made sure he didn't freeze on a couch," she said. David glanced around the apartment as he stepped inside, eyes sweeping over the uneven floor tiles, the flickering light above the sink, the stack of envelopes held down by an empty coffee mug. "You gave him more than that," he said gently. "You gave him back to me." Walter looked at Marcus then. "I didn't even know what I needed until you spoke to me. I didn't ask for help, but you gave it. Not for credit, not for reward. You just saw someone who needed something, and you didn't walk away." His voice broke slightly near the end, but he didn't look away. Marcus stood frozen, trying to process the weight of those words, unsure what to say. Diane stepped in quietly. "Gets that from his father," she said, almost under her breath. "Man didn't have much, but he'd give the coat off his back if it meant somebody else slept warmer." David turned to her again. "I work with a logistics firm. We've got a couple roles open. Entry-level admin, steady hours, full benefits. If you're interested, I'd like to offer you one." Diane blinked, mouth opening just slightly, unsure whether to laugh, refuse, or cry. "You don't have to say yes now," David added, his tone respectful. "Just know it's there." "And Marcus," Walter said, stepping closer, voice gentler now, "we want to make sure you never have to skip school again to pick up extra shifts. You deserve more than surviving." Marcus felt his throat tighten, emotion creeping up before he could stop it. He nodded once, then looked down at the floor, unsure what to do with the flood rising inside. "You don't have to," he started, but Walter shook his head. "I know, that's why we want to." The room fell quiet for a moment, but it wasn't the awkward kind. It was full, heavy in the best way, like everyone knew something important had just passed between them. Diane looked at the pot on the stove, then back at the 3 men standing in her living room. "We don't have much," she said, "but there's enough soup for everyone." They sat at the fold-out table, bowls of hot broth between them, steam curling in the air. No one said much. No one needed to. The sound of spoons scraping gently against ceramic filled the space. David set down his spoon first, glancing around the room once more. "You all live with less than you deserve," he said, "but somehow you had more to give than most people I know." Diane just smiled faintly and kept eating. Later, as the front door closed behind their guests and the hallway light flickered once again, Marcus stood at the window watching the taillights disappear into the dark. His mother came up beside him, arms crossed, leaning lightly against his shoulder. "You good?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "I am." That night there were no overdue bills being shuffled on the table, no questions about tomorrow's dinner, just quiet and peace and something else neither of them dared to name out loud. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.